The ambulance siren echoed through the hospital corridors, a sound that I already knew very well, but that day, seemed more distant. I was in my office, reviewing some medical records, when the emergency call came to me. Male patient, found in critical condition on the street. No identification. Transferred to emergency room now. The tone of the nurse on the other end was tense and hurried. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my coat and headed towards the emergency room. As I walked, I heard laughter and mocking comments from my coworkers. "Another pauper who will cost time and money," said one of them, with a sarcastic smile. "Reed is going to waste his time again, like he can save the world," added another, laughing. I felt butterflies in my stomach, but I ignored the comments. The truth is that, despite my reputation as an efficient and cold doctor, something inside me stirred. I couldn't put someone's life aside, no matter who it was. Upon entering the emergency room, the scene unfolding in front of me was chaotic. The man, who was now known to be homeless, was stretched out on a stretcher, covered in bruises and dirt. His face was pale, and I could see that his breathing was ragged. "Blood pressure dropping, heartbeat weak," shouted a nurse. I nodded, already preparing to act. "We're going to need an 4-line and a fluid accelerator. Get the intubation equipment ready," I ordered as I approached the patient. The team moved quickly, but I felt the pressure of my colleagues' critical eyes weighing on me. They murmured, exchanging disdainful glances. "Another lost cause," I heard one of them whisper. "Silence," I shouted, and the room instantly fell into an awkward silence. "This man needs us, and we will save him." I felt a surge of determination come over me. It was as if that man's life was intertwined with mine, an invisible thread connecting our souls, even though I didn't yet know who he was. While the stabilization procedures were taking place, I couldn't stop looking at his face. He was so dirty, unshaven, and disheveled, but there was something there, a spark of life that I couldn't ignore. "You'll be fine, I promise," I murmured, more to myself than to him. The team continued to work, but I got lost in my thoughts. What would have brought that man to the streets? What story did he carry? "Samuel, we need you here," a nurse called, pulling me back to reality. I focused, got back to work. I was focused, but I felt a strange connection to this man, as if he was calling me back to the essence of what it means to be a doctor. It wasn't just about diagnoses and treatments, but about lives. Lives that deserved to be saved, no matter who they were or where they came from. Time seemed to drag by as we worked. Every second counted. It was a joint effort, and I could feel the tension building as the situation became more and more critical. "He's losing a lot of blood," warned one of my colleagues. "We need an urgent transfusion." I decided I wouldn't give up. "Come on, guys. A little more effort. He's still with us." I heard the voice inside me, an echo of determination. The man in front of me was a stranger, but at that moment, he was all that mattered. And I was determined to do whatever it took to save him. As the team gathered around the stretcher, I realized that despite the skepticism that surrounded me, there was a greater purpose to this act. Saving a life, any life, could be the key to reclaiming my own humanity. And for a brief moment, the emergency room wasn't just a workspace, but a sanctuary of hope. The fluorescent light of the operating room illuminated the inert body of Jake, a stranger who, in a short space of time, had become the focus of my attention and, paradoxically, of my deepest reflection. After hours of surgery, I finally pushed myself away from the table, exhausted but determined to see him get out of that bed. The medical team dispersed, but I remained, watching the face of the man who had been found in the streets. The skin marked by time and difficulties contrasted with the memories that were beginning to emerge in my mind. "Samuel, are you okay?" The voice of Lisa, the nurse, interrupted my reverie. I saw her with a worried look, with her hands folded in front of her apron. Her concern was genuine, and it made me realize how far I had strayed from any empathy up to that point. "Yes, just thinking," I replied, still deep in thought. "Who was Jake before all this?" "I don't know," she said, leaning on the table so she was closer. "But it turns out, he had a very different life. The paramedics mentioned that he was an artist, someone talented. It's sad to see how life can change like this." Her words reverberated through me. An artist. The idea that this man, now almost unrecognizable, had once expressed his soul through art made my heart sink. An artist! And what happened to him? I don't know the details, but the streets have this power to consume people, Lisa said, looking at Jake with compassion. It's as if society has forgotten him, and he himself has forgotten. Her words penetrated my mind. I had spent years in the hospital, treating illnesses, wounds, and symptoms, but I had never stopped to think about the stories behind each patient, the weight of the life that each one carried. What led Jake to this situation? I had focused so much on healing bodies that I forgot to heal souls. While Jake recovered, I began to focus on getting to know him. During the day, I spent time at his bedside, talking to him, even though he was unconscious. I wanted him to know that someone cared. But I also started exploring the journals I found in his backpack, a veritable treasure trove of thoughts and experiences. The pages were worn, but the words still shone with the intensity of his story, full of passion, love, and tragedy. Look at this, I said to Lisa, showing a clip where Jake talked about his first art shows. He had dreams. He wanted to change the world with his art. And he still can, Lisa replied, looking at me hopefully. Maybe he needs someone to believe in him again. With each passing day, I found myself more immersed in Jake's story. His struggle with his inner demons, the losses he suffered, and the love he had left behind. One afternoon, while I was organizing the journals, Lisa entered the room, bringing coffee. "Samuel, you are getting too involved. Don't forget he's just a patient," she said, her tone cautious. "I know," I replied, trying to convince myself. "But I can't ignore what he represents. Each of us is more than the image we show to the world." Lisa looked at me with an understanding expression. "You are sure? We all have our struggles. But don't forget to take care of yourself too." Those words echoed in my mind. I had become so obsessed with trying to save Jake that I was neglecting what that meant for me. What did I really want? What had I left aside in my own life? That night, as the sounds of the hospital faded and silence took over, I sat next to Jake and spoke to him, as if he could hear. "You know, Jake, I'm lost on some things too. I became attached to the coldness of medicine. But you taught me that every life has value, that every story deserves to be told." The connection that was beginning to form between us was unexpected. I knew Jake's journey was just beginning, just like mine. And somehow I hoped that together we could find the humanity that had lost its way. As Jake began to recover, I realized that something inside me had changed. The hours spent by his side, listening to his stories and observing his interactions with the team, made me reevaluate what it really meant to be a doctor. I was not just treating illnesses, but lives, and each of them had a unique story, a weight of experiences that could not be ignored. One morning, while reviewing patient charts in the break room, Lisa walked in with a smile on her face. "Samuel, have you seen how Jake is doing? He's really trying hard in physical therapy," she said excitedly. "I saw it," I replied, trying to hide how emotionally involved I was. "He's trying really hard. That's good for him." "It's more than that," Lisa replied, sitting down next to me. "Did you see how the other nurses rally around him? He's brought a light to this place. People are coming together to help him." I couldn't deny it. Jake's presence had changed the atmosphere of the hospital. He, who before was just an unknown patient, was now almost a symbol of hope. What started as a solitary effort of mine to save him turned into a collective movement. The team became involved in his recovery, bringing him books, art supplies, and even organizing small events to motivate him. "You know, Samuel, you've changed too," Lisa said, looking me in the eye sincerely. "The way you treat patients now is different. It's like you're connecting with them in a way you never did before." I remained silent, reflecting on his words. It was true. I had become more attentive, more present. Looking at Jake, I understood that he wasn't just a clinical case. He was a person, a soul who had faced a lot. "I hope Jake finds a way back," I murmured, more to myself than to her. Over the next few days, Jake continued to surprise everyone. His determination was contagious. He started to sit in a wheelchair and tried to draw with the pens we brought. One day, when I entered his room, I found him concentrated, with his eyes fixed on a sketch he was making. "Hi, Jake. What are you drawing?" I asked, curious. He looked up, a smile lighting up his face. I'm trying to capture the light coming in through the window. It's like the world outside is calling me back. I was touched. You really have an incredible talent. I'm impressed. Thank you, Dr. Reed. This means a lot to me. I've always loved drawing, but, well, you know how complicated life can be, he said, his gaze falling away for a moment. Yes, I do, I replied, remembering my own complications and choices in life. But you're here now, and that's what matters. Let's work on this together. The friendship that was forming between us was undeniable. Sometimes I found myself thinking about how his words and his art were shaping me. He had become a source of inspiration, not just for me, but for the entire team. The nurses began decorating the hallway around their room with their artwork, creating a welcoming and vibrant environment. One afternoon, while we were organizing a small event to celebrate his recovery, a famous artist who admired Jake happened to stop by the hospital and decided to pay a visit. When he entered the room, the atmosphere instantly changed. "Jake, is that you?" he exclaimed, eyes shining with recognition. "I can't believe you're here. Your works have been an inspiration to me." Jake was stunned, his mouth open in shock. I didn't know you knew my work. How could I not? Your talent is impressive. You need to get back to creating, my friend." The conversation flowed, and the joy was palpable. I watched, my heart warmed by the realization that not just Jake, but all of us there, were rediscovering humanity in the midst of an environment that often felt cold and impersonal. The connection between them was evident, and I felt like I was witnessing a rebirth not just for Jake, but for all of us. So, in that hospital in New York, amid emergencies and deadlines, I learned that true medicine lies not just in healing, but in connecting. And as I looked at Jake, now surrounded by love and support, I understood that every life, regardless of its story, deserves to be saved and celebrated. The physical therapy room was lit by soft light streaming in through the windows, while the sound of rehabilitation equipment echoed in the background. Jake was sitting in a chair, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to balance himself. I watched him closely, my heart tightened with a mix of hope and concern. He had been through so much, and I knew the road to recovery would be filled with challenges. "Samuel, do you really think I can still make art again?" His voice was a whisper, almost lost among the ambient noise. I could see the insecurity in his eyes, the weight of the past still suffocating him. "Jake, you have an incredible talent. Art is not just a skill, it is a way of expressing yourself, of freeing yourself. I believe in you," I replied, trying to convey a confidence that I wasn't sure I felt myself. A silence fell between us, as he looked at the floor, reflecting. I just don't know if I can face it all again. The memories, the pain," he sighed, his voice breaking. "Sometimes it's easier to hide." "I understand. But think about what art meant to you. Think about how it could be a refuge, a form of healing. We don't need to run, we can take it one step at a time," I said, trying to encourage him. Jake looked up, and there was a spark of determination in them. "Do you really think you could help me put on an exhibition? Show my works again?" "Absolutely, Jake. I will make it happen. I believe this could be a big step for you," I stated, feeling a wave of enthusiasm rising within me. The idea of organizing an art exhibition for him was not only a way to help him find his way back, but also a way to show the world the beauty he had created despite his pain. However, as we talked, a shadow of worry began to form in my mind. The hospital was facing increasing pressures. My superiors had already questioned me about the time and resources I was dedicating to Jake. "Samuel, you need to focus on the patients who can really be saved," said one of the bosses, with a look of disdain as he passed me in the last meeting. How could I explain that Jake was more than a patient? That he was a life with a rich and complex history? "Samuel, you seem worried," commented Lisa, the nurse who has always supported me. She approached while I was lost in my thoughts. "What are you catching?" "I'm thinking about the exhibition. I feel like it's important, but things at the hospital are complicated. I don't know if I'll have the support I need," I confessed, looking at her. "You need to follow your heart. Sometimes real medicine goes beyond the hospital walls," she replied, with an encouraging smile. "If you believe this can help Jake, then fight for it. He deserves it." Lisa's words resonated within me, and for a moment, I felt lighter. I knew that regardless of external pressures, the The connection I had with Jake was something I couldn't ignore. He wasn't just an affair. He was a human being with dreams, fears, and a story that needed to be told. When physical therapy ended, Jake and I met in a quieter corner of the hospital. He drew a sketch on a piece of paper he was keeping. "Samuel, look at this," he said, with a twinkle in his eye. It was an abstract figure, but there was a raw beauty in the way he had captured the emotion. I feel like I'm starting to remember how good it felt to create. "That's beautiful, Jake. You're finding yourself again, and this is just the beginning," I encouraged. "If I get a chance to show this to people, maybe I can find myself again," Jake said, hope beginning to shine in his eyes. "Let's make this happen. I'm going to talk to the administration and organize everything," I declared, determined not to let the hospital's uncertainties stop me. He smiled, and in that moment, I realized we were on a journey together. It wasn't just about saving a life. It was about rediscovering the value of humanity in each of us. So, with renewed determination, I prepared myself to face the obstacles that would come, not knowing that the real battle was just beginning. Soft afternoon light streamed in through the hospital window, illuminating the room in a way I rarely noticed during my long journeys. My heart was still pounding in my chest after the art show I had organized for Jake. The makeshift gallery in the ward was filled with smiling faces, admiring the talent that once seemed lost in the shadows of street life. However, the joy that enveloped us all was abruptly overshadowed by the arrival of an old friend of Jake's, who I recognized immediately by his look of disdain. "Jake, do you really think you can go back to who you were?" The man's voice was sharp, and the way he looked at Jake made my stomach turn. "You're a failure, and you know it." Jake, who until then seemed radiant, had a closed expression, as if a dark cloud had settled over him. I'm trying, Mark. I'm not who I was, but I'm changing." His voice was shaking, and I could see the walls he had built around himself starting to crumble. "You can't just erase the past, you idiot. You'll go back to the same life. Art won't save you." Mark was furious, and I knew I needed to intervene. "Hey, Mark," I shouted, approaching. "What are you doing here? Jake doesn't need you to remember past mistakes. He's fighting for a new life." "New life? Look at him." Mark pointed to Jake, who was now teary-eyed. "He's an artist, but he's also an addict. And you, doctor, think you can save everyone with your empathy? That's just an illusion." Those words echoed in me, and for a moment, I found myself swaying. But then I remembered everything Jake had overcome, the strength he had shown. Empathy is not an illusion, Mark. It's what makes us human. Every life has a value, and Jake deserves to be given a chance. We all do. Jake's gaze lifted to me, and I realized that, beneath the pain, there was a spark of hope. "Samuel, He hesitated, searching for words. "I want to change. I'm not just an artist, I'm someone who can still be better." "You are more than that, Jake. You are a survivor, and now it's time to show the world the beauty you carry inside," I said, trying to infuse courage into his words. Mark laughed sarcastically. "Good luck with that, doctor. But in the end, you'll realize you can't save everyone. And Jake, well, he'll end up disappointing you." Mark's words were like stabs, but I couldn't allow him to tear down what we had built. It's not about saving everyone, it's about giving everyone the chance to save themselves. That's what medicine should be. I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "If you can't support Jake, then maybe you should leave." Mark stared at me, and for a moment, tension hung in the air. He finally turned and left, leaving a trail of uncertainty and fear. When the door closed, I turned to Jake, who seemed a little calmer, but still fighting the demons that haunted him. "Sorry, Samuel," he murmured, eyes downcast. "I didn't want that to happen." "Don't be sorry," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "It's your fight, but you're not alone. I'm here with you. Let's face this together." Jake took a deep breath, and I saw determination rekindle in his eyes. "I want to try. I feel like I'm one step closer to finding my art again. I don't want to go back to the darkness." "Then let's do this. Let's find a way to bring your art back to the light." I smiled, feeling the connection between us strengthen. He needed support, and I was determined to be that anchor for him. As we talked about the future, I realized that the real struggle wasn't just Jake's, but mine as well. The resistance I faced in a hospital, the voices that doubted the importance of a patient like Jake, all challenged me to rediscover my own humanity. And as I looked at Jake, I saw that he wasn't just a patient. He was a symbol of human resilience, a reminder that we all have stories worth telling and lives worth living fully. The emergency room environment was charged with tension. The bustle of nurses and the incessant beeping of monitors created a chaotic symphony that seemed to echo inside me as I prepared for Jake's surgery. He had become more than a patient. He was a friend, a project, a representation of my own struggle against the apathy that consumed me so much. What to do now? The thought of losing Jake again paralyzed me. "Samuel, are you ready?" Lisa's voice cut through my thoughts. I looked at her, noticing that she was worried too. "Yeah, I'm just thinking about what could happen," I replied, trying to hide my vulnerability. The truth was, I was terrified. The last time I felt this way was during my first surgery on a patient with a grim prognosis. It had been a failure, and I couldn't let history repeat itself. "We're going to give it our all, like we always do," she said, her determination giving me some strength. The procedure began. The team's every move was methodical, but my mind was racing. I needed to save Jake, not just for him, but for myself as well. He had shown me a new way of seeing the world, and I was determined to give back. As I operated, every cut and every suture became a manifesto of hope. "Samuel, vitals are dropping," shouted one of the residents. The butterflies in my stomach returned. "Connect the defibrillator," I ordered, my voice firm, but my heart racing. I dove headfirst into the operation, disregarding the fatigue that was already consuming me. Time seemed to stretch, and every second that passed was a reminder of the fragility of life. Finally, after what seemed like hours, we managed to stabilize Jake. I allowed myself a small smile, but the euphoria was interrupted by an alert from the laboratory. A blood test, requested at the last minute, revealed something surprising. The doctor who was analyzing him entered the room, with a serious face. "Dr. Reed, you need to see this," he said, holding the papers in shaking hands. "The results show that the patient is one of the missing sons of local tycoon, Charles Hargrove." The air escaped my lungs. What did this mean? The story of Jake, the man he had met on the streets, was not just one of pain and overcoming, but of a life that had been ripped from him by a series of tragedies. I looked at Lisa, who looked just as stunned as I was. "He's a Hargrove. This changes everything," I muttered, trying to process the new information. "Yes, and that could mean he will have all the support he needs. But what if he doesn't want to?" Lisa questioned, a shadow of concern in her eyes. "We need to talk to him when he wakes up. Jake needs to know he's not alone," I replied, already planning the conversation. When Jake finally opened his eyes, his confused gaze met mine. There was a distinct glow to them, a mix of relief and fear. "Samuel, what happened?" His voice was weak, but there was a determination there. "You're safe, Jake. We have been through a difficult time, but you are here. And I need you to know something." I hesitated, but the urgency made me continue. "You are a Hargrove. Your father, he's looking for you." Jake's face contorted in a mix of disbelief and sadness. I'm not that boy anymore. I'm just Jake now, a lost artist. But this artist has a story that deserves to be told. "Let's do this together," I assured, feeling the emotion tighten my chest. "You don't have to face this alone." At that moment, I realized that my journey with Jake wasn't just about saving a life. It was about rediscovering my own humanity, about understanding that every human being carries a precious story, and that compassion can transform even the most hardened hearts. "Samuel, do you really believe I can go back to who I was?" Jake asked, his eyes reflecting timid hope. "I know you can. We're going to do this together," I replied, feeling that, somehow, that bond we had created had become a light in the midst of the darkness. The road would be long, but now, we were no longer just a doctor and a patient. We were two human beings, struggling to find meaning amidst the chaos of life.